I was brushing my teeth when my phone rang at 12:17 a.m. A voice I didn't recognize said, "Emily, I'm sorry. Hannah is gone." My toothbrush slipped from my hand. By the time I stood at her funeral, still numb, her younger sister approached me. "She left you something in her will," she whispered, eyes darting toward her parents. Every pair of eyes in the room turned cold on me, like I had stolen something. But what Hannah left wasn't money, or at least, not just money. It was a secret that would rip apart everything I thought I knew. I used to think the word, unfair, was something children cried out on playgrounds, not something that seeped into your bones until it became part of who you were. But by the time I was 20, it was the quiet truth of my life. My sister Sarah was the golden child, radiant, effortlessly charming, a mirror of everything my parents valued. When she turned 18, she got a brand new silver sedan with a bow on the hood. When I turned 18, I was handed the keys to a dusty old bicycle my father pulled from the shed, its tires half flat and rust speckling the chain. In our living room, when guests came over, Sarah was the centerpiece. My mother would brag about her scholarships, her perfect GPA, the internship she landed in the city. If I happened to be there, she'd glance at my outfit, jeans and a sweater, and sigh loudly. "Emily, you could at least try to look presentable," she'd murmur, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter that followed never failed to make my skin crawl, so I learned to disappear. My bedroom became my sanctuary, a small cluttered space lined with bookshelves I'd filled from thrift stores and library sales. There, under the dim yellow light of a desk lamp, I read until the words blurred. Fiction was the only place I could breathe without feeling compared, measured, and found lacking. One evening in late spring, we sat around the dining table. My parents, Sarah and me. Sarah was retelling for the third time the story of how she'd been offered an additional grant for her upcoming semester. My mother beamed. My father refilled her glass. Then my father said, "Sarah, we have to celebrate this. What day was it you got the letter?" Sarah's smile widened. "June 12th. I felt my stomach knot. June 12th, my birthday. No one at the table looked at me. No one seemed to realize. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stared at the condensation sliding down my water glass. The realization landed quietly, but with the weight of a stone. They didn't forget the date. They just remembered something else more. That night, I lay awake staring at the cracks in my ceiling. The thought I'd never allowed myself before began to grow. I didn't have to stay. I could make a life somewhere they couldn't compare me to Sarah. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through student housing listings on my laptop when I saw it. Room available near campus, friendly roommate. That was how I met Hannah. She was a year older, studying architecture, with a laugh that filled the entire apartment and a way of speaking that made you feel like you mattered. She didn't just tolerate my presence. She sought it. She asked what I thought about books, about films, about the ridiculous price of coffee on campus. It was startling to be asked and not immediately corrected. It didn't take long before late-night kitchen talks became our ritual. One evening, over steaming bowls of instant ramen, she told me her own story. "My parents?" she said, twirling noodles with her chopsticks. "My sister is their pride and joy. Straight A student, first violin, engaged to some corporate lawyer. I'm the one they forget to introduce at dinner parties." I laughed, but it wasn't because it was funny. It was the kind of laugh that comes from recognizing your own reflection in someone else's pain. "So, I guess there's more of us out there," I said. "There are," Hannah replied, her expression softening. "And you know what? We don't have to play their game. Her words clung to me. In Hannah, I'd found something rare. Someone who understood the rules of a rigged system and chose to live outside it. Slowly, she became the family I wished I'd had. The kind that celebrated my small wins, that didn't measure my worth against a checklist. We had quiet nights where the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic. We had loud ones, too. Spontaneous trips for ice cream, laughing until our stomachs hurt over stories we probably wouldn't remember in the morning. These moments were my breathing space, the kind that made the rest of the world's noise fade. It was just after one of those peaceful nights that the phone rang. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Hannah was in her room, sketching for a project, so I reached for it. But it stopped before I could answer. A moment later, my own phone buzzed. This time, the vibration seemed sharper, urgent. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause, then a low, hesitant voice. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes." I don't know how to say this. Hannah, the voice cracked. "She's gone." The chopsticks slid from my hand, clattering onto the countertop. My first thought was that they were wrong, that it was some kind of mistake. But the silence that followed was too heavy to be anything else. The church smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors on the casket at the front. I kept my eyes low as I slid into the last row, hoping to disappear among the crowd. But it didn't work. I could feel them, Hannah's parents, watching me from across the aisle. Their gaze was cool, ours sharp, as if my very presence here was an intrusion. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, pretending to read the order of service. But my mind drifted, unbidden, to every time I had tried to be someone my parents could be proud of. The late nights cramming for exams, the summer I worked 2 jobs to pay for my textbooks, the volunteer hours at the community library. I'd handed them each achievement like an offering, waiting for a smile, a nod, any sign that I mattered. More often than not, they met my efforts with silence, or worse, with a reminder of how Sarah had done it better. The service moved in a blur. Hymns. A eulogy that made my chest ache. The soft scrape of chairs as people rose and sat again. My throat burned as I walked toward the front after it was over. A framed photo of Hannah stood beside the casket, her eyes bright and laughing even in stillness. I stopped, leaning closer so no one else could hear. "At least," I whispered, my voice catching, "you saw me." A rustle behind me made me turn. Hannah's younger sister, Claire, was standing there. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes red from crying. She stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was barely more than breath. "She left you something," Claire said. I blinked. "What?" "In her will." Before I could respond, a relative called her name. She straightened, her expression shuddering, and walked away without another word. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure if I'd imagined it. But the way Hannah's parents were looking at me, like I'd been caught in a lie I hadn't told me it was real. I left the church with my head down, the words looping in my mind. "She left you something." The next day, the fallout began. A neighbor of Hannah's mother stopped me outside the grocery store. "You shouldn't be making trouble for them," she said, her tone sharp. Trouble? I hadn't done anything. By the end of the week, I was cornered in the church parking lot by Hannah's uncle, a tall man with a deep voice and eyes that never softened. "You have no claim to anything she owned," he said. "You're just a roommate. Don't make this harder than it has to be." It was like stepping back into my own childhood, the same undertone, the same dismissal. My voice didn't matter. My place in the story didn't matter. That night, as I was locking my apartment door, a car idled at the curb, The passenger window rolled down, and a woman I didn't recognize leaned toward me. "Don't read the will," she said quietly. "For your own sake." Then the car pulled away, leaving the echo of her warning hanging in the cool night air. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared, trying to make sense of it. Why wouldn't they want me to hear it? What could possibly be in that will that would make them afraid? The answer didn't come that night, but the next morning as I shuffled to my door in my slippers, I found an envelope on the mat. My name was written in neat black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Emily Carter, you are hereby invited to the reading of the last will and testament of Hannah Lee Simmons. Date, Monday, 10 a.m. Location, Weston and Carter Law Offices." I read it twice, my pulse thudding in my ears. Whatever they didn't want me to know, I was about to find out. The morning before the will reading, I couldn't shake Hannah's voice from my mind. "Don't let them decide your worth, Emily." She'd said it so many times, usually when I was doubting myself over some comment from my parents or comparing my life to Sarah's. At the time, it felt like comfort. Now it felt like a challenge I wasn't sure I could meet. I needed air, so I walked to the little coffee shop we used to haunt between classes. The place smelled the same, dark roast and cinnamon, but it was quieter without her laughter ricocheting off the walls. I ordered her usual, a caramel latte, and sat at our favorite corner table. The empty chair across from me was a reminder of how quickly people could vanish from your life, leaving you to hold their words like fragile heirlooms. I sipped slowly, letting the hum of the espresso machine fill the silence. I thought about the way Hannah lived, never apologizing for taking up space, never letting her family's opinions cage her. She'd made her own rules, and in her orbit, I'd started to believe I could too. Monday came too fast. The law office was on the 5th floor of a brick building downtown, the kind that smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. I sat across from Hannah's parents and a handful of relatives, their faces drawn tight. Claire gave me a small nod from the far end of the table, but said nothing. The lawyer, a man in a charcoal suit with rimless glasses, cleared his throat. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Hannah Lee Simmons." He spoke in a steady, practiced cadence, listing the formalities and minor bequests, small sums of money, personal items to various relatives. Then he turned a page, his eyes flicking toward me. "To my friend and roommate, Emily Carter," he read, "I leave my apartment at 14 Maple Street, fully paid, and the journals kept in the top drawer of my desk." The words felt unreal. My breath caught. Around the table, chairs creaked as heads turned sharply in my direction. Hannah's father's jaw tightened, and I could feel the air thicken with unspoken questions. After the meeting, the lawyer handed me a set of keys and a cardboard box. "These were hers," he said. "She wanted you to have them." At the apartment, I set the box on the kitchen counter and pulled out the stack of journals, thick, leather-bound, worn at the edges. I opened the first one, dated 3 years ago. The early pages were about school, sketches of architectural designs and notes about friends. But as I read further, her handwriting grew sharper, her words heavier. She wrote about the suffocating favoritism toward her older sister, the arguments with her parents, the times she'd been excluded from family trips. Then came an entry that made me sit up. "Found out today that Grandpa left me a trust fund. They never told me. Found the paperwork by accident in Dad's desk. They said it was better this way. I read it twice, my mind spinning. They'd hidden money that was rightfully hers." Flipping through, I found a page with my own name. Emily understands. She knows what it's like to be the extra, the one they don't brag about. I trust her more than anyone else. And then, the second shock. Another entry, months later. I think someone in Emily's family knows about the trust. Strange connection. Need to confirm before I confront them. My pulse hammered. What could she have found? Near the back of the last journal, her handwriting grew uneven. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain. Look under the kitchen table. There's a loose board. Beneath it, you'll find the key. I stared at the sentence, my fingers tightening around the page. Whatever that key unlocked, Hannah had hidden it for a reason. And now, it was mine to find. The loose board under the kitchen table came up easier than I expected. Beneath it lay a small brass key, cold and surprisingly heavy in my palm. It fit the lock on a narrow metal box I'd seen tucked into the back of Hannah's bedroom closet. My hands trembled as I turned the key. Inside, wrapped in a plain white envelope, was a USB drive. At my desk, I plugged it in. The folder names were clinical: statements, trust docs, email exchanges. But the contents were explosive. Bank statements showed regular withdrawals from an account in Hannah's name, signed off by her father. Emails revealed heated arguments between Hannah and her parents about money she'd only discovered by accident. The final document was a scanned copy of her grandfather's will, proving the trust fund was intended solely for her. The next afternoon, I arranged a meeting at the Simmons house. I told myself I was doing it for Hannah, but the truth was, I wanted to see their faces when they realized I knew. I sat at the edge of their living room sofa, the USB drive on the coffee table between us. Hannah's father crossed his arms, her mother perched stiffly beside him. "I found this in her things," I said. "You've been hiding her inheritance." "That's not true," her father said quickly. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked toward his wife. "It is," I said, forcing my voice to steady. "I have proof, and I think Hannah wanted me to have it." Her mother's lips thinned. "You've misunderstood. That money was hers," I cut in, "and you knew it." The room erupted. An uncle shouted from the doorway. Another relative muttered something about me digging for trouble. Claire sat in the corner, pale and silent, her hands clenched in her lap. One by one, people started leaving the room, slamming doors behind them, until only Hannah's parents and I remained. Her father leaned forward, his voice low. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Let it go." That was when Claire spoke up, her voice trembling, but clear. "Hannah wanted to go to the police," she said, "but she didn't, because someone stopped her." "Claire," her mother warned. Claire's eyes found mine. "It was your uncle, wasn't it? The one married to Emily's aunt." The air went cold. I didn't know what to say, but my silence was answer enough. I left the house with my pulse pounding, the USB clutched tight in my hand. Back in the apartment, I opened one last file I hadn't noticed before. It was an audio recording. Hannah's voice filled the room, steady but edged with something darker. "If you're hearing this," she said, "it means they'll never stop, and they'll come for you too." The following days blurred into a haze of threats and warnings. A letter from a lawyer claiming I was in possession of stolen property. Text messages from unknown numbers. "Leave it alone. You don't know who you're dealing with." One morning I found a note slid under my door. People who dig too deep don't always like what they find. I tried to tell myself to ignore it, to walk away. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah's handwriting in those journals. Her dreams, her frustrations, her stubborn hope. One night, unable to sleep, I sat on the floor with the journals spread out around me. I read until my eyes burned, until I found the page I'd been unconsciously searching for. Even if I can't change things for myself, maybe I can for someone else. The next afternoon, there was a knock at my door. A man in his 50s stood there, holding his hat in both hands. "I'm Robert Simmons," he said. "Hannah's uncle." "I know who you are," I replied cautiously. He nodded, glancing down the hallway before stepping inside. "I think we can end this quietly. No lawyers, no police. You hand over everything, USB, journals, whatever else you've got, and we walk away." "And if I don't?" His eyes hardened. "It won't end well for you." I folded my arms. "And what do I get if I do?" "A clean slate and no one breathing down your neck." He hesitated. "It's the best offer you'll get." I didn't answer. I just stared at him, the weight of the choice pressing in from all sides. Therapy wasn't something I ever thought I'd try. Growing up, it was treated like a weakness, something other people did when they couldn't handle their lives. But after weeks of threats, sleepless nights, and the weight of Hannah's journals pressing on my conscience, I knew I couldn't carry it all alone. The first few sessions were awkward. I didn't know where to start. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Mason, told me to imagine my life as a room. "Who do you let in?" she asked. "And what do you allow them to touch?" I realized my room had no door. My parents walked in and out, rearranging everything. Sarah's shadow stretched across the floor. Even Hannah's absence was a presence, her voice echoing in the corners. We worked on boundaries, not walls, but doors I could close when I needed to, saying no without guilt, recognizing when love became control. It felt foreign, but slowly, it became natural. One crisp autumn afternoon, I took a break from my sessions and walked through the park. Leaves spiraled down in shades of gold and crimson, crunching under my boots. I could almost hear Hannah's voice beside me, teasing me for being too sentimental. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. I stopped at a bench, tilted my head back, and let the sunlight touch my face. "You're still here," I murmured. Not in the way I wanted, but enough to keep going. That night, sitting in the apartment she'd left me, I made a decision. If I could confront the Simmons family, I could face my own. I picked up my phone and dialed my parents. My voice was steady as I asked, "Would you come over this weekend? I want to talk." When the call ended, my hands shook, not from fear but from the certainty that this was the right step. The meeting didn't happen right away. I needed time to prepare, to build something that could stand on its own before inviting them into it. Over the next few months, I poured my energy into an idea that had been growing quietly since the night I read Hannah's words about changing things for someone else. I registered the Hannah Lee Foundation, a scholarship and support program for students who had been overlooked, discarded, or undervalued by their families. I used part of the inheritance to fund the first year, and I made sure Hannah's story was front and center, not as a tragedy, but as a reminder of what resilience could look like. Applications flooded in faster than I expected. Reading through them was like walking through a hall of mirrors. So many young faces carrying the same weight I'd known. The letters spoke of favoritism, neglect, and the quiet loneliness of feeling invisible at home. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. As I cross-referenced applications with the list of schools and communities we were targeting, I recognized several last names. Families who knew mine, people who had sat at my parents' dinner table. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just my story or Hannah's. It was a pattern that reached further than I imagined. One applicant wrote, "My parents always told me I'd never be as good as my brother. I believed them until a teacher told me otherwise." Another said, "They saved for my sister's tuition but told me to figure it out myself." Their words burned into me, Helping them felt like a way of undoing something. Not just for them, but for the part of me that had been told I wasn't enough. The foundation became more than a project. It was a reclamation. Every award letter we sent felt like a quiet rebellion against the systems that thrived on comparison and silence. One late evening, after finishing the last of the paperwork, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written in my mother's looping script. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a small, worn photo album. The first picture was of me at 3 years old, covered in chocolate frosting, grinning at the camera. Page after page held snapshots of birthdays, school plays, messy art projects. And on the inside cover, in her handwriting, "You have always been my daughter." I sat there on the couch, the album open on my lap, unsure if the words were an apology or something else entirely. But they were a beginning, and for now, that was enough. My parents arrived on a Sunday afternoon. I'd set the small dining table with coffee and tea, unsure which they'd prefer. When the knock came, I took a deep breath and opened the door. They looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that wasn't just about years. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with all the things we'd never said. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not here to rehash everything," I began, "but I need you to understand what it's been like for me." I told them about the years of being compared, of feeling like an afterthought, about Sarah's victories being treated as a family triumph, while mine passed unnoticed. My voice shook once or twice, but I didn't stop. My mother's eyes glistened. My father stared down at his hands. "We thought we were pushing you to be better," my father said quietly. "We didn't see what it was doing to you." "It's not about blame," I replied. "It's about changing things now. For all of us." Tears came, mine, then my mother's. My father's eyes stayed dry, but he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. It didn't erase the past, but it was the first time I felt they were truly listening. When they left, I stood on the balcony of my apartment. The city stretched out before me, bathed in the orange and pink of sunset. For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. The weight on my chest had lifted, if only a little. Months passed. The foundation grew, and I settled into a life that was finally mine. Mornings were for work, meetings with donors, reading applications, mentoring students. Afternoons sometimes disappeared into coffee with friends or long walks in the park. I was learning the art of living without apology. One rainy Thursday, while reorganizing my bookshelf, I came across Hannah's last journal, the one I'd stopped reading after finding the key. I flipped to the final pages, my fingers tracing the familiar curves of her handwriting. There, tucked into the back cover, was a folded piece of paper. Inside were 2 plane tickets, dated for the week she died. Destination: Florence, Italy. My breath caught. She'd booked them for both of us. On the opposite page, she'd written, "If you find this, I hope you go, whether I'm with you or not. See it all, Emily. Don't let the walls they built around us be the end of the story." I pressed the tickets to my chest, eyes stinging. She had planned a future I didn't even know to dream about. That night, I sat at my desk, the city lights glittering beyond the window, and booked the same flight number, same day of the week, a year later. When the confirmation email came through, I whispered into the quiet, "I'll take that trip for both of us." The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't scare me. It felt like the beginning Hannah had always wanted for me. And now, I wanted it too.